Hello, today's video is going to help us avoid a nasty little stumbling block, because every year the examiner regrets that students who demonstrate an astounding knowledge of this play fail to achieve the high grades that they deserve because they fail to hit the adequate standard when it comes to analysing language, when it comes to analysing what J.B. Priestley's trying to say or do or show through the words that he uses. And after all, nobody wants to be that student who writes an essay so beautiful, the examiner's wiping the drool off his chin, but doesn't secure the A because he's not done enough in terms of linguistic analysis. So, if we want the examiner's cold husk of a heart to melt like chocolate in your pocket, we need to evaluate. And it's not unreasonable if you're sitting there thinking, fair enough, Mr. Taylor, tell me how then. How do I evaluate? Because, I know how to analyse language. I can tell you the effects of that metaphor. I can say why the writer used that powerful verb. What's the difference then between analysing language and evaluating it? Well, one way to look on the term evaluate is to think of it in terms of providing more than one interpretation for your evidence, for that quote from the text. It's almost like analysis squared, analysis to the power of 2, if you want to be all mathematical about it. Basically, you're analysing the same thing twice. Now, I'll be honest, it's not always possible to do this, to pull out two meanings from one of your quotations. But it is useful to remember that words are quite slippery things, really, because they can have more than one meaning attached to them. So that it's very difficult for you to kind of fix down definitively on one interpretation. Just look at these two cartoons on the page, complete with eye-wateringly bad gags, because wordplay is a great way to appreciate how slippery words can be. You've got the snowman saying, "I'm a cool dude." You've got Humpty Dumpty saying, "Egg jokes crack me up." Now, I appreciate you're not rolling around on the floor, honking up a lung, laughing your heart out, but you can appreciate that the humour, such as it is in these cartoons, stems from the duality of meaning, the fact that these words cool and crack have two meanings. Cool can refer to temperature, but it can also refer to attitude as well, can't it? Similarly, crack me up might refer to making me laugh, but of course eggs can crack too. And sometimes, as we'll see in this video in the case of Gerald Croft and Mr. Birling, we can say something and not realise that our words can be interpreted a different way from what we intended. And I'll give you a very brief example before we go on to looking at the language in an Inspector Calls. So a pal of mine, when he was at school, said he had a teacher with an enormous bottom. I mean, this bloke, he'd need to be buried in a T-shaped coffin, so prodigious was this bottom. And my pal had done some work, he'd done a painting or something, and this teacher shuffles over and says to my mate, he says, "Well, Neil, that's a promising painting. And here I have a big butt, use more blue." Now, of course, my mate, he's chuckling his heart out because somebody with a big bottom has just said, "I have a big butt." Of course, what the teacher intended was to use but as a conjunction or connective there. So you can see that it is hard for us to fix one meaning onto our words. Words are slippery things that can be read in more than one way. Now, as I've said, you won't always be able to pull two meanings from a word or phrase, but you might be able to pull out more than one language or structure technique. So, for instance, you take a metaphor, you analyse that metaphor and you say what the effect is. You can show that you're evaluating language by going back into that quotation and pulling out another language technique, perhaps alliteration or onomatopoeia. Your evidence then can sometimes be a bit like Mary Poppins' bag. It's quite a small, insignificant thing, but you rooting around inside, you can pull out all sorts of interesting things. So, just to recap, analysing two things or three things from the same bit of evidence can also be classed as evaluation. So let's get on now with the serious business of evaluating language in an Inspector Calls. Let's have a look at this one from Mr. Birling. In Act 1, at some point, he refers to himself as a hard-headed businessman. And the first interpretation that we can pull out, we can infer here, is that this is a man concerned with making profit. But we can drill down a bit deeper and pull out a secondary interpretation. Hard-headed suggests that he sees himself as a sensible man. He's not swayed by emotion. He doesn't give way to feelings of empathy and sympathy. I suspect that Mr. Birling believes he's paying himself a real compliment here. However, words, as we've said, are slippery things. And if you're talking about yourself as hard, that can allude to a heartless nature, to be hard of heart, perhaps as well as hard of head. This is another interpretation that we can pull out of that term, hard. And this for me is the real money shot. This is where we see Mr. Birling damning himself from his own lips, being blissfully unaware of one of the interpretations that the audience can infer from his words. Hard-headed might suggest that he's pretty thick, that he's stupid, he's got a hard head. Don't forget, this is the guy that said there's going to be no war, the Titanic's unsinkable, it's going to be the end of labour agitations. This guy is a fool. Now, we've done an awful lot with that quote, hard-headed businessman. We've certainly evaluated it because we've pulled out at least 2 solid interpretations or meanings. Now, with a little bit of Mr. Taylor magic, let's parlay those rough notes into a sleek A-star paragraph. Abracadabra. Okay then, let me read this vision of beauty and then we'll examine how it's hitting those A-star high notes. Mr. Birling's assessment of himself conveys a multiplicity of meanings to the audience. He declares, "We hard-headed businessmen must say something." Birling uses the term hard-headed to suggest he is not swayed by emotion in his financial dealings. However, we can infer from hard that he is heartless, refusing to let sympathy for his fellow human beings affect his business decisions. He is hard of heart then, not just hard of head. Moreover, hard-headed could imply to the audience that Birling is stupid, an idea Priestley has already established through dramatic irony when he praises the Titanic. Now I'm imagining that this is a paragraph that I would write in response to a question such as, how does Priestley present Mr. Birling? What methods does Priestley use to present Mr. Birling? And that first line, Mr. Birling's assessment of himself conveys a multiplicity of meanings to the audience. It's just a very high level way of saying, I have pulled out more than one interpretation for his words. There is, in a sense, a multiplicity of meanings, more than one meaning to his words. I've locked in on that key quote. I've delivered my big quotation, "We hard-headed businessmen must say something," and then I've gone and I've laser locked onto hard-headed. Examiners love it when you do that. You take a word and zoom into it and pull out its significance. So hard-headed suggests that he's not swayed by emotion. That's the first interpretation. I then whack in the connective, however, and I roll out that second interpretation about him being heartless, because we can derive that from hard. Later on, I use moreover, another connective that's signposted to the examiner. I'm going even deeper. Hard-headed implying that Birling's stupid, and that's already been established with the dramatic irony. So you can see there some of the tricks that I've employed to frame that paragraph in a real sheen of A-star majesty. I'll whip through this one very quickly. Feel free to pause the screen at your leisure. This is me now looking at Gerald Croft's dialogue and trying to pull out a multiplicity of meaning, trying to evaluate some of his words. He refers to Alderman Meggerty, the chap who kind of sexually harasses Eva Smith. He refers to Alderman Meggerty as having an obscene fat carcass. And one interpretation of this is it highlights Gerald's superficial nature. This is a man who judges on appearance. He doesn't kind of look for nobler, deeper qualities. It's all about surface to this lad. Another interpretation we can pull out from this quote is that this is Priestley kind of criticising the very shallow values of the Edwardian era. And this is a time that Priestley believed saw a prioritising by the upper class of surfaces and appearances over moral values. So surface over depth, style over substance. But we're not done there. No, sir, because I think we can squeeze out a final interpretation to really ram home to the examiner the idea that we are evaluating this piece of evidence. It's significant that Meggerty's fat because his size symbolises the greed that Priestley sees as defining that ruling class that Meggerty and the Birlings represent. Fat then acts as a cipher or as a symbol for bourgeois greed. So we take that multiplicity of meaning, we take that number of interpretations. We've evaluated language. Now let's turn that into a polished paragraph. Abracadabra. I'll read this one through, and if you wish, you can always pause the screen and consider why I've put certain bits in bold. What techniques of A-star paragraph writing am I trying to highlight through my bold here? But I'll read the paragraph to you. Preeti presents Gerald through the way he describes Oliver Meggerty. Gerald mentions Meggerty's obscene fat carcass. This emphasises Gerald's superficial nature, his preoccupation with surfaces, which is Preeti's way of attacking the shallow values of the Edwardian era. Moreover, it is significant Meggerty's fat because his size symbolises the greed Preeti sees as characterising the ruling class Meggerty and the Birlings represent. To conclude then, let's look at what we've learned. The examiner wants to see A-star candidates evaluating language, and evaluate simply means looking for alternative interpretations in Priestley's language. If you can't find a double meaning to the words, what you can do is go back into the evidence and give a secondary analysis, a secondary interpretation of another language technique. And don't forget to use connectives like moreover, furthermore, in addition, just to create that sense of flow in your paragraph. And that's us, folks. Language evaluated to A-star standard. Job's a good one.